Kelly, I think we should probably go ahead and start.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelly Davis. I'm the Director of Peer Advocacy, Supports and Services at MHA. And thank you for joining us for our Build Your Peer Career National Advanced Certification webinar. Patrick Hendry will be presenting, and I'll give a quick introduction of Patrick, and then we'll get started. So Patrick is the Vice President of Peer Advocacy, Supports and Services at Mental Health America. Patrick has worked as a mental health advocate for the past 24 years. His areas of expertise include peer-provided services, self-directed care, recovery-based training, organizational development, and management and sustainability. Patrick received MHA's highest honor, the Clifford W. Beers Award in 2012, and a SAMHSA Voice Award, and Eli Lilly Reintegration Lifetime Achievement Award in 2014. He's the former executive director of the Florida Peer Network and has assisted in the development of numerous peer-run programs and organizations. Patrick is a strong supporter of the inclusion of mental health consumers in all aspects of the behavioral health system. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Patrick.
Great. Well, thanks, Kelly. So, as she said, I'm Patrick Hendry, and I see I have Dante, Jill, Jennifer, and Mark on. Is anybody else on?
Toby Lopez and Tina Wilder.
Toby?
Lopez
and
Tina Wilder with the Mental Health Association of East Tennessee.
Great. Welcome. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So today we're going to talk about how you can build your peer career. And let's see if it's giving me the... Kelly, I no longer have the control. There, maybe it's just slow. So, you know, some of the things that we know that recovery really isn't just about what clinical services that we receive. In fact, if you look back over even the last 20 years, you can see that almost all of the progress that's gone into moving towards recovery, for individuals to move towards recovery, has been a result of the introduction of peer support into the mental health system. And the key to using peer support is to know what creates recovery and how to build a system that supports it. And so we've, you know, over the years, there's been a lot of talk about peer support and how some people feel that as peer support gets involved with the system, that it's somehow co-opted and it's not as pure as maybe peer support standing outside the system of care. But the reality is what's happened is that peer support has come into that system and changed the attitudes of all the clinicians that they work with. Every time we introduce peer support into a behavioral health system, that system moves more towards a recovery model away from a medical model. And it's very slow. So, you know, for a long time, it's been seen primarily as a job with very little room for advancement. I mean, many of us who started working in peer support, I've actually been doing it now for 28 years. And when I first came into the system, and for many years after that, there was only one kind of job you could get. And this was before certification even. So we would come in these peer roles, and there was never any way that we could advance, and there was very little in the way of increases in pay. In fact, for many years, most peers were paid minimum wage. Now that's beginning to change, and I think the national average right now for a peer specialist is just under $13 an hour. There are some that go as high as $22 an hour and some that go as low as minimum wage. But we are seeing that number go up each year, and this is a good thing, and I think we're going to start to see it increase even more rapidly because of a number of things that we're going to talk about. And we're just going to have to wait on these slides to change themselves. There we go. So,
Patrick,
one of the big
just let me know. Sorry, Patrick, just let me know when you'd like to change them, and then I can change them so it goes faster.
Okay, thanks, Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
So, with all the, with these decades of experience that we have of the advent of peer support in the mental health system, finally people are beginning to catch on that this really works. And the important people to understand this are the people who fund it. And that's been our most difficult challenge, was that funders are only interested in the bottom line. Now we have gathered sufficient evidence that we can show that peer support not only enhances recovery and improves the overall quality of life, it also is economically feasible for organizations to provide it. We see when we introduce, for instance, peer support into inpatient settings, working inside hospitals or crisis units, we see that rehospitalization rates go down dramatically, in some cases as much as 75%. We see that the use of ER visits goes down, crisis stays go down. Peer support, so it not only saves lives and makes the quality of people's lives better, but it also allows the system to offer even more services because we're lowering those deep-end services costs. Change, please. So this is just basically the same thing. So when we can show the case that it's cost effective, and the way we've most been able to do that in about the last 15 years was the advent of managed care for Medicaid. Most states now provide Medicaid services through managed care organizations. And when managed care first started coming out in the early 2000s, many peers, including myself, were very much against it because we thought it was going to take funds away because the managed care company obviously has to get paid, and we thought therefore services would go down. But a couple of things have happened. Managed care actually is more efficient than the old fee-for-service system that the states were running previously. And the other great thing is that managed care has really supported peer support in many, many states. And so through them, because they keep very accurate records, we're actually able to prove not only that we are increasing quality of life, that we're keeping people out of the hospital, that we're keeping people out of the ERs, but we can also prove that we're saving money that's better spent in providing more services and greater access to services. Next slide, please.
Who is that? Hi,
in the last 17 years, the number of certified peer specialists has gone up just hugely. In 2001, Georgia graduated the first class of certified peer specialists in the nation, and there were only 35 people in that class. So in 2001, we had 35 certified peer specialists. The survey that was done in 2014 reported that there were 14,000 certified peer specialists now in the country. Another survey done in 2016 reported 24,000. It's now estimated to be over 30,000 and maybe closer to 35,000. And that doesn't include the states that don't have certification. And the biggest one of all is California. California has just passed legislation to create a certification, but they still don't have one. But they have an estimated 6,000 peer specialists working in their system. So there very well may be over 40,000 peer specialists working in mental health right now. Next slide, please. So every state that's developed a certification has set its own standards. And so, you guys are all from different places, and that means that the standard for your certification is probably different from each other. There's a few states that have shared standards, but mostly each state has its own standards and its own examination. And these standards can vary tremendously from state to state, which has created a big problem for peer support to really expand fully throughout healthcare. In order to go beyond Medicaid funding or state tax revenue funding, we've got to get Medicare involved and we've got to get private insurance involved. And the problem is that those systems, both Medicare and private insurance, work across state lines. Medicaid is a state-run program. Even though half the money for Medicaid comes from the federal government, and there are some regulations from the feds, but each state runs its own Medicaid and provides half the dollars that go into it. Medicare is a completely federal system. So it's the same whether you're in Florida or Washington State. Across the country, they have the same standards. And so if they're going to start paying for peer support, they want to make sure that when they hire somebody, they pay somebody for peer support in Florida and they pay somebody else in Washington State, that they're getting the same quality of work. They also, one of the things, we've done a lot of surveys of insurance companies over the last few years, and one of the things that we've been told repeatedly is that they really, especially for private health insurance, which is a for-profit business, they're very much interested in seeing advanced skills, a higher degree of experience before they're willing to pay for these services. And so this has created a real roadblock for us, but it's just beginning to change. Next slide, please. Some of the emerging opportunities that are coming up now on our radar is that health insurance plans and large healthcare organizations are now interested in providing peer support. The problem is, again, they can't figure out how they can get a standardized quality of service. But as we access these new funding sources, the opportunities for new jobs and career paths where you don't just come in at one level and stay at that same level for the rest of your career, but you actually have opportunities for advancement. This is really exciting. So how do we overcome the problem of varying standards and levels of experience? Next slide, please. In answer to the problem, Mental Health America has developed the first advanced level national peer support credential, the MHA National Certified Peer Specialist. We began this program last year, and we're beginning to really start to get people applying for it and going through the examination. Our certification requires that in order to get it, peers must have a minimum of 3,000 hours of experience. Now, we've looked at all of the various state qualifications and requirements, and the highest that I've seen in the country for a state certification is 1,200 hours, and the lowest I've seen in state certification is 100 hours. So obviously, we're looking for people who have been already working in this field for a minimum of 1.5 years full-time. That's 3,000 hours. You also have to have an advanced set of knowledge and skill sets that are measured by our examination. It's a 125-question proctored exam. That means that it's taken in a place where you can be observed while you're taking the test to prevent people from using crib sheets or looking up things as they're taking the test. We also require that if you're in a state that has certification, that you already have that credential. And this is because primarily that's how you're going to get 3,000 hours of experience in your own state, is by having been certified by your state. If you're in a state that doesn't have a credential, we ask that people have a minimum of 40 hours of training from an approved training organization, and we have a list on our website, and I'll give you the website for the NCPS in a little bit. That 40 hours of training really is a minimum amount, and we picked it because that's the amount of training that the majority of states require to get their certification. The thing is, once you start looking at the material that's involved in the national certification, you'll probably begin to identify some areas that maybe you need additional training in. And we've been doing some what we call master classes for our affiliates, and eventually I think we'll probably do them for a wider range of audience. But you can get most of the things you need through attending webinars or going to in-service trainings wherever you work. A lot of it is just an extension of what you already know. For instance, one really good way to get a lot of what's necessary for our certification is for you to go through the WAM classes. Most peer specialists have been through RAP, and an increasing number have been through WAM. WAM is Whole Health Action Management, and it's a class for peer specialists to learn how to run support groups that address whole health needs for the people in the group. Next slide, please. So advanced level certification is the answer to the needs of private payers and Medicare. Mental Health America and with some of our affiliates, we've already piloted providing peer services for the largest HMO in the country, and we've done that in 2 states. And we've also piloted it for the largest hospital organization in the country. And we're now in the process of implementing some new pilots with private health insurance and also with one of the nation's largest healthcare organizations. So being an MHA National Certified Peer Specialist can open some new doors to better jobs and better career paths, and frankly, to higher salaries. We're just beginning to penetrate these new markets. So it doesn't mean that as soon as you get certified and you're in a state that hasn't yet opened up these doors, or the insurance that's being used in your local area is not one of the ones that's chosen to pay for peer support. It may take some time, but one of the ways we get those insurance companies and Medicare to open those doors and begin to fund it is by providing really high-quality peer support that's verifiable with a credential that has the highest standards in the country, and being able to prove that to insurance companies and to CMS, part of SAMHSA that controls Medicaid and Medicare, and being able to prove to them that we have those standards. This is the way we're going to convince them to open up paying for services across the country. And once that happens, then the amount of jobs will more than double, and the amount of pay will go up significantly. The pilot programs that we've done to date have paid anywhere from about 60% higher to even 100% higher, double the amount that peers in the same general geographic area were being paid prior to those pilot programs. Next slide, please. So some of the requirements, or the requirements for this credential that I'm talking about, first is a high school diploma, and that's the same as any state certification requires, or a GED. As I said, 3,000 hours of supervised experience, so you're able to prove that you've actually had 3,000 hours. Now that can be either paid or voluntary. But it has to be provable, so somebody has to be able to verify your participation. Current state certification, if it's available, or completion of an MHA-approved training program. One professional letter of recommendation for certification, and one supervisory letter of recommendation for certification. You also have to really attest to the fact that you have lived experience. Next slide, please. The other requirements are that you agree to be bound by the MHA National Certified Peer Specialist Code of Ethics. And that's, again, the same type of rule that each state has under their certification rules. You have to pass the written examination. As I said before, it's 125 questions. And I can tell you, I was one of the people that helped write it, and we got together a team from around the country of 25 very experienced peer specialists to help us develop the examination. And then we all took the test, and nobody has ever scored a perfect score. In fact, I think the highest score to date is a 96%. So it's a pretty tough test. The cost of certification is $225 for 2 years. And we've seen, for instance, in these pilot programs that we've done with in the private sector, that they were willing to pay to get the people working for them certified. So hopefully, you know, as people begin to go online with the certification, they'll be able to get their employers to at least help support the cost of it. The cost of the written exam is $200. The reason for that is this is a national exam, so it has to be able to be provided wherever you live in the whole country. We're in the process now of trying to make it an online examination that uses some virtual proctoring things so that you have your camera on at the time that you're taking the test and a few other things that will require. And then the cost to renew the credential every 2 years is $200, plus each year you have to get 10 hours of ongoing education units that are just, not very strict about them, but they need to be within the framework of the certification itself. And it's very easy if you want to look at the application materials and the other materials. The website is www.nationalpeerspecialist.org. So a very simple address. Next slide, please. So right now, the latest estimates that I've seen is that there are about 11 million individuals with what the clinical world would call serious mental illness. I prefer to talk about mental health problems. And there are actually many millions more experiencing mental health conditions and other conditions that would greatly benefit, you know, if they could get peer support where they are. And to show how far away we are from being able to provide services to those over 11 million people in the country, there's a significant number, probably close to half of the existing 40,000 peer specialists that are currently unemployed. And that's part of that is because budgets were severely cut in the late 2000s and continued to be cut in many states from 2009 through about 2012 or 2013. Now they're back on the rise. But one of the things that was first cut as they cut their behavioral health budgets were some of the peer-run programs. And again, that's because we have not been able to prove to those states that this actually was a bonus to them, a benefit to them, to keep the peer support programs as a way to control costs, but also to get the highest quality of care. Any questions so far? If you have any questions, just speak up and let me know. Next slide, please.
How could the many peer specialists be unemployed if it seems that there's such a great need?
Because there's not funding to pay for all those jobs. So, for instance, I live in Florida, and I was the head of developing certification in the state of Florida back in 2005. In the first year, first 2 years, we certified 1,200 peer specialists, and I think by the end of the second year, over 900 were employed. I left Florida in 2009 to go to work for Mental Health America in the D.C. area, and I returned here a couple years ago. There were only 300 positions available, 325 positions, paid positions available in the state when I got back here. It had been cut from 900 to just over 300 in those years. It's now back on the rise again, but it's not going up anywhere near as fast as it originally did. And that's not because peer support didn't work. It's because the agencies still were not really taking us seriously. But now there's plenty of evidence, and we have a website that's www.centerforpeersupport, all one word, .org, that has tremendous amount of the evidence that you can use to show employers, to show state officials, just how effective peer support is. There's a new study that just came out of Great Britain just in the last couple of months that is a long-term study that looked at a very high number of people to really show how effective peer support is. In the next 5 to 10 years, It's been estimated by Ron Manderscheid. Ron is a PhD. He used to work for the National Institute of Mental Health. Right now, he runs the National Association for County Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities Directors. And Ron is kind of like the encyclopedia of mental health. He probably keeps a closer track of everything going on in mental health than any other individual in the country. And Ron's been estimating that he believes in the next 5 to 10 years that the peer workforce will actually account for as much as 20 to 25% of the entire behavioral health work. And as we see, how quickly things are rising, I think this is probably true. If it is true, 20 to 25% of that workforce, and taking out jobs like school behavioral health and marriage and family counselors, just taking the ones that work more with people with what we would think of as more serious issues, that would be 84,000 to 105,000 peer specialists that would be needed to fill that much of the workforce. Next slide, please. So in order to meet this need, we've got to be able to meet the needs of those funding organizations that I've been talking about. And that's why a national certification, and right now we are the only advanced national certification in the country. And it's so important because it will allow the expansion of peer support across healthcare. We've, in the last 9 months, we formed a coalition with some of the biggest training organizations in the country. So DBSA is one of the largest trainers. A group out of Phoenix, Arizona called RI International has trained more people than anyone outside of the VA. They've trained nearly 10,000 peer specialists. Mental Health Partnerships, which is a Mental Health America affiliate in Philadelphia, has trained about 4,500 peer specialists. And then we've brought in some other groups in California, and we're bringing in INAPS, the International Association for Peer Support, to create a coalition. And our mission in this group is to expand peer support, not only throughout behavioral health, but really throughout healthcare. If you think about it, peer support, what peer support does is not limited just to behavioral health. Everybody who's going through serious health issues can benefit to some degree through peer support. And it's already existed. For instance, in treatment for diabetes, there exists peer support. It's primarily done on a voluntary basis. There is a training through one of the national diabetes organizations, but it's nowhere near as rigorous as what we go through for our trainings. And they don't have certification. One of the benefits of certification is that if you're certified and you go to work for an organization and somebody questions, were you qualified to provide those services, you can prove you're qualified because certification is a legal document in most states. Now, a few states call their credential certification, but they don't actually go through the standards of real certification. So they're actually more of a certificate program. But the majority of states have created valid, legally defensible credentials. Any questions about any of this?
I would like to ask a question,
Sure.
Toby. My name is Toby, and I'd like to know what the ratio is between recovery specialists that are volunteers and actually paid hired certified peer recovery specialists. And also, would it be helpful if it was considered a more holistic kind of position instead of peer support in each separate realm, like you said, diabetes, but like holistic person in a hospital could, for physical health issues, could utilize peer support as well as someone who is in a hospital for a mental health issue.
Absolutely, and I'll address that part first, and then I'll go back to the first part of your question. Absolutely, peer support really is a holistic approach to supporting people through very stressful times. That's almost most of what we do. as peer specialists. And then there is that part of shared lived experience where that enables us, one, to kind of understand the type of stress that people are under because we've gone through it ourselves. And it also allows us to understand how the system of care for that specific issue works. So there is a place for both. I think there's a place for people who are generalists, who provide peer support across healthcare domains. And then there's also a place for people who have specialties. So for instance, you might be able in the future to get a peer specialist certification that is a very holistic, generalized peer support type of role, teaches you all of those skills that we learn in, listening, communications, goal setting, action planning, all of the type of things that we do. But then that you'll also be able to get a specialty that goes with it. So in our case, that would be behavioral health. But in somebody else's case, it might be a breast cancer issue, or it might be diabetes or heart disease or any number of, very stressful long-term type health conditions that so many millions of people experience. Once we start opening up those doors and really can begin to cross over into just healthcare, then peer support is going to explode. It's going to go way beyond even those figures I was just talking about. You asked about ratio between voluntary and professionalized or paid services. I've never seen a report done on that, a survey done on that. In the communities, I've worked all around the country setting up peer support programs. I ran one of the SAMHSA National Technical Assistance Centers for a number of years, and so I helped set up in states across the country their peer support program. So just from my personal observation, one thing I would say is most people start off as a volunteer. That's how we kind of get into it. Maybe it's in a support group or at a drop-in or recovery center or some other way. But many people start off as volunteers. Some people choose to stay volunteers, and then others, would like to make a career with this. One of the negative things that's happened because of the stagnation of peer support, the fact that you get hired by, say, a community mental health center, and then your wages would only go up maybe a cost of living like 2% per year or something. Because of that, we've lost thousands of really good people because they couldn't make a living doing it. So as we begin to change that, people will be able to have real careers and make a livable wage where they can support themselves and their families. But again, I would say what I've seen just personally is probably 20% of the workforce in a given community, maybe even a little lower than that, maybe 15% would be volunteers, and then the rest of the people who are in formal role of peer support, working within some kind of organization, the majority of them are paid. But again, as far as I know, nobody's ever actually done a survey on that. It would be interesting to see. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. Recently, I went on a national job website, job search website, and there were over 700 peer support positions listed. That's amazing when you think about it. They're on a national website, 700 positions, which gives me hope because I had searched maybe 3 or 4 years ago trying to find out how many places were looking to hire peers and where that was. And I never saw more than 100, 125, maybe 150 at any given time. So this is exciting because I think we're beginning to see peer support really come back and come on strong. So as more and more peers find work and begin to be able to earn a living wage, then they're going to be able to think about ways to actually build career paths with the possibility of advancement. Next slide, please. So today's environment, just in behavioral health, does offer a lot of opportunities for peer support to become a major aspect of our healthcare services. And that's because peers are being now used in a wide variety of different ways in different communities. So it's important that the organizations that hire peer support also change and grow kind of organically by mastering all of the things that you need to support peer support work. For instance, we know that supervision of peer support is very different than, say, supervising case managers. But when most community mental health centers or local mental health community public providers first hire peer support, begin to create positions within their workforce, there's usually a case manager who is their supervisor. The problem with that is that they don't really understand the full role of what peer support does and what it's capable of. They also don't understand what peer support is not. And so consequently, many, and probably some of you, but many of us have in the beginning certainly experienced where, you know, we did things like drive the van or deliver medications or sit in on day treatment, you know, work and things like that. And maybe the most closely real peer support work we did was perhaps to facilitate support groups. We're moving away from that, and most places are beginning to get that message that supervision for peer support needs to be specialized. So most of the big training organizations are now actually offering training to supervisors too. So that's a very natural career advancement for a good peer specialist to look at, is maybe moving from doing the one-on-one peer support to actually supervising a team of peer specialists. You know, and when I was doing that in community mental health, the best part of the job for me was that one-on-one work. That's the part I always enjoyed the most. So I made sure when I moved into a supervision role that I continued to work with individuals. And I think many people would say that that's what gives the most joy and satisfaction to our jobs, is working with one person face-to-face and helping them and seeing that look that people get when they really first begin to realize that recovery is not only possible, that it's likely, that most people can recover to a life that has meaning to them, to one that they choose. You know, and that's probably been the biggest issue in the past, that when people came into the mental health system and were diagnosed, they were given, and sometimes it still happens, they're given a message of hopelessness. And they're told, you know, you have a mental illness, you'll always have a mental illness, you'll always be on medication, you'll probably never work again, or if you do, it's going to have to be something very simple. Luckily, you know, all of you and tens of thousands of people across the country have realized that that's not true, that there is hope, and that we can all work towards recovery, and then we continue to work towards our recovery. So the organizations that we work in need to adapt to be the most supportive they can be of peer support, so that they get the best quality out of the people that they hire. Next slide, please. How do you guys feel about that? I mean, have you had similar experiences when you first started doing this type of work, or did you have similar experiences of hopeless messages when you were first diagnosed or hospitalized? Anybody want to comment?
I was told with my bipolar schizoaffective that I would never amount to anything and was never really given a chance, and now I'm working to help people in their recovery process. I've been doing it since 2014 at a call center in East Tennessee.
Wow, congratulations. When they first gave you that message, did you begin to believe it?
Yes, I did, and I isolated for over 10 years because I was afraid of relapse.
Oh, my.
Yes.
It's very sad. It's too bad that you didn't have the availability of peer support at that time.
Exactly.
Somebody else was going to comment. Who was that?
Oh, this is Vanessa. I was just told not to tell anybody. about my diagnosis. And so I think that may have led to a little bit of, or certainly a lot of shame and kind of what can I do or what is this, and kind of led to kind of self-doubt and lack of self-confidence for sure. Because then you begin to doubt, your own abilities, your own capability of being able to overcome things.
Hopefully somebody will answer that phone. It's tough when you have to do these things in an office because you can't control everything going on around you. Yeah, I mean, these kinds of messages and the effect that it has on us. I mean, I remember, when I first started having real symptoms of bipolar disorder, I didn't know anything about what that was or what it was that I was experiencing. And I actually went to a psychiatrist and I was told, oh, you just need a vacation. And so I continued to work and continued to have worsening symptoms for the next 5 years until I crashed and burned like many of us do. And I ended up in a crisis unit and eventually in a hospital. And I was lucky at that point in that I was in one of my first hospitalizations when a guy came to visit somebody else in the ward with me. And we were sitting in the little lunch area. And they were sitting at a table next to me, the guy and this woman he was visiting, and he was talking about this place they were getting ready to open, and he called it a drop-in center, and I had no idea what that was, but he was telling the woman the things that would be available. He talked about support groups, and he talked about information about, mental health conditions, and the idea that, he didn't use the word recovery because this was well before we started to use that term. We really didn't start talking about recovery until the late 90s, very late 90s actually, most places. But he was saying it. That's what he was talking. He was talking about having a life. And I went home and like one of you said, I isolated for quite a long time. I would hide in my house, and if somebody came to the front door, I'd run out the back door and hide. I was so afraid to be around other people. And then one day, I guess I was just a little bit stronger, and I remembered that conversation, and I happened to remember the name of the place, and so I decided to go there. And when I walked in those doors, and that guy was sitting at the desk, and he said, I know you. And then he started to talk to me about the place. I felt like I was home. And I started volunteering very shortly after that, and was running support groups, and eventually I became the executive director of that organization, and then we opened other recovery centers in our neighborhood. We started the first peer-run organization that was funded by the state of Florida. And it was all because that one person happened to come into my life at the right moment, Because if he hadn't been there, I probably would have continued to isolate until somebody broke through, or I ended up in the hospital again and maybe had a second chance to meet somebody. So
I have a comment if I can.
Sure.
I think the job actually found me. I struggled with depression, through, my whole childhood into adulthood and postpartum depression, hospitalizations, all that kind of stuff, suicide attempts, and eventually, got my act together, and I actually lost a daughter to suicide almost 6 years ago. And shortly after we, restarted our life in a different state, this job, I wasn't even looking for a job. This job posting just came to me, and here I am today, and I work with SMI clients which is severely mentally ill, for those who don't know, in Arizona. And us mental health workers don't necessarily do this job for the pay, but it is so rewarding, and it heals me as well, leading my suicide awareness groups and my, choose joy skills groups and meeting with my clients and helping them progress to maybe even do my job. And I'm also a peer support trainer here and train new peer supports. And just to see how my life has evolved, especially in the past 2 years that I've been doing this, it feels like I've been doing it for my whole life. And I think it really helps your clients know that you understand what they might be going through, and you're not just some hoity-toity professional sitting behind a desk telling them what to do and how to live their lives. I think that it helps so much that, we've been through something and we get it.
That's very well said. And you said, not everybody does this for the pay. I mean, frankly, anybody who gets into mental health services or behavioral health services in general never comes in it to get rich, even the psychiatrists.
Right.
They're paid the lowest average amount of any MD. But we do it, most of us do it because we're personal connected. We all do it because we have lived through this ourselves and continue to live with it. And then people who take other jobs. My wife is a retired therapist. And she got into it because it was something very close to her own heart. People do it because they have some connection to it. Whether it's their own issues or a family member's issues, a loss like yours, I'm so sorry to hear about, or, a friend. We come into it because it has meaning to us. And it is you said doing it, you feel like you've been doing it your whole life. That's because it's a life's work. It's something that really creates a new life for us. And, one of the principles behind the concepts of peer support is the helper principle, which is a very old concept that's been around almost as long as mankind's been around, where people would get together in groups. And what it means, basically, if you're not familiar with it, is that when you help somebody, it helps you too. And I can sincerely say that the work I've done with individuals and in groups has always taught me something new, has helped me to become better at what I do, to become stronger, to become more dedicated. So I totally believe in that helper principle. I sometimes think I get more out of it than the people I'm helping.
Patrick, can I ask a question? This is Lori Thomas in Clearwater, Florida.
Hi, Lori.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
I had a question just about the MHA national certification, and are you having much of a response with that? Is there a lot of people getting certified?
It's growing fairly quickly now. I think we have over 100 and some people in the process right now, and I haven't heard the most recent figures of how many people have completed it. One of the things that, we had trouble with, it's been the growing pains, was finding places where we could provide the examination. So that slowed a lot of people down. But we're solving that problem now because we're getting ready to go over to an online examination. And, we even had some people drop out because they were having to wait so long to take the exam. So it's the growing pains of trying to start something on a national level. But we have tremendous interest in it. People have invited me to talk in probably 8 or 9 states doing keynote addresses about this, and it's been at every major conference, and a lot of conversation, a lot's been written about it too. It's good to hear from you, Lori.
You too. Thank you.
I have another question.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Kelly from Arizona.
No
So I've had difficulty trying to find a way to become nationally certified. I've, filled out questionnaires and things like that, and the only response I've ever gotten is, well, we're waiting to have something in your area. So is that basically what you were trying to talk about? So is it just an exam, or is it a training program, or...
No. And this is through Mental Health America you're talking about specifically.
Yeah.
And they're not being clear to you about what they're waiting for? They're not telling you what they're waiting for? It's not a training.
They just said...
Basically, you should have received acknowledgement that you're qualified, and the next step is to take the examination. Where are you located?
Arizona.
Where in Arizona?
I am outside of Phoenix, about 45
Arizona
minutes outside of
State,
Phoenix.
Arizona State University is offering the test, and if you will contact our office directly, don't go through the application site, contact Kelly Davis, and I'll give you her email address. And Kelly will
I think
help
I
walk
actually
you
have
through
it, yeah, Davis.
Okay. Kelly will help you walk through this, and we do have a testing site in Phoenix now. So.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I'm sorry you've been given kind of the runaround. That's very disappointing to hear.
That's okay. I'm just rocking my life as a state certified right now.
That's a good way to put it. I like that. So again, as we talk about expanding the role, as peer support knowledge increases, so do the possibilities for its use. And that's why, a big part of what we're trying to do is to make sure that people continue to learn throughout the cycle of work that they go through, that we're always increasing our knowledge base. And we're doing that at Mental Health America through our Center for Peer Support. Anything new types of programs, new ways of providing services. One of the biggest needs right now in the country is providing peer support in rural and frontier environments because the distances are so huge. And so, people are now working new ways to provide virtual peer support. And we're finding that some ways work very well and some ways don't. But, that's a new environment for us, and it's going to expand greatly. People are already being used in so many different ways. I mean, outpatient peer support, so in the community, visiting people where they are. Some people like to have people come to their home. Some organizations don't do home visits. I've met with people in libraries and community centers and drop-in centers, and then sometimes people, because of the nature of their job, meet with people within the provider facility. Mobile crisis teams around the country are starting to use and provide peer support. ERs are beginning to use peer support, particularly in public health. In some of the larger, more public health funded hospitals, they're hiring people or peer organizations, or sometimes Mental Health America affiliates or other organizations contract out peer services to a place like a hospital. So they might do ER support, or they might do inpatient services. There's a model called the Bridger model, which has actually had the highest results of any type of peer support that's been studied. The Bridger model, if you're not familiar with it, is when you go and you meet people in the hospital and you begin to build a relationship with them. Now, if you're in a state hospital where people tend to be for longer periods of time, you may work with them for months at a time. But in most hospitalizations nowadays, especially because like Medicaid and people don't want to pay for much hospitalization, so most crisis stays now average anywhere from the 72-hour limit that most of us when we're taken in involuntarily to 5 to 7 days. So in those cases, and the peer support goes in and meets a person, it's very important that you build a trusting relationship as quickly as possible, because the purpose of the Bridger system is to help bridge the transition back to the community. So the same person who worked with the person inpatient now works with them in the community. And that's the critical time, is post-hospitalization. More people are rehospitalized within 90 days of hospitalization. The highest amount is within 30 days. but a very significant number of people are rehospitalized within 90 days of release from hospitalization. So if you can have peer support through that time period and maybe even longer with somebody that you've gotten to know and you trust, the outcomes are tremendous. And we see things like rehospitalization rates dropping over 70% in hospitals that have opened up to these Bridger models. Bridger model was created in New York State. It's very big there. It's now taking place all over the country in different places. And like I said, it's the statistics, if that's what you're looking at. And if you're a funder and you're looking at the money, it also brings about the biggest savings. We've got peers working in the criminal justice system, and generally the person who works in peer support with people who are involved in the criminal justice system has lived experience himself with being involved in that system so that they can help people through those transitions. Substance use and addictions, it's growing rapidly, and a lot of places, there are peer support certifications specifically to substance use or addictions, but there's also certifications that are more co-occurring disorders. And so your main issue might be mental health and you have co-occurring substance use issues, or your main issue might be addictions and substance use, and you also have a mental health condition. And so we find that that's maybe in the long run that might be the best option for people, because we know that there's a super high percentage of people who live with serious mental health problems that use or abuse various substances, and we know that among people who use and abuse medications, street drugs, alcohol, whatever, that there's also a very high incidence of co-occurring mental health problems. So I think the combination of the two is going to probably prove out to be the strongest model. We've now got peer-run respite facilities around the country. Are all of you familiar with respite? Anybody not familiar with respite? Okay, we have, excuse me, we have peers now doing homeless outreach. There's a really big program in New York City. Actually, there's multiple programs running in New York City to provide homeless outreach, and those peers, have gone through peer support training, but they are also individuals that have experienced homelessness too. I worked with the VA about, 5 years ago or so to create a homeless outreach peer specialist training, and I had actually experienced homelessness in my own life. Luckily, it was fairly brief, but it was very eye-opening, and it was something I would never want to experience again. But anyway, that did provide some assistance. But I worked mainly with, as we put this course together, I worked with vets who had experienced homelessness and mental health problems in order to develop this course. There's youth peer support coming up. In fact, there's actually youth peer support using people under the age of 18. For a long time, that was like a barrier that you couldn't have somebody in a formal role that was, not an adult. They're finding new ways to answer that, and I need to learn more about it myself. I was familiar with what was going on for a number of years, but haven't been too involved. There's groups now that are specializing in maternal peer support. So, prepartum and postpartum issues that people go through, and, people who are living with a diagnosis and maybe are taking medications and become pregnant and then have those special issues to deal with. And then we also have many, many peers working all over the country doing training themselves. And they do not only peer specialist type training, but we do RAP trainings, we do WAM trainings, we do a whole host of different types of trainings around the country. Many of us have created trainings just for our own communities. Next slide, please. So as these expanded roles happen and people are working in all these various areas, there are some companies, some organizations, I should say, that have people working in many of those different positions. And so they're beginning to actually create career paths for people that have come back to work as peer supporters. And, the majority of people who work in peer support start their work, the majority, not all, but majority start their work while they're on disability. Now that may be SSI or SSDI. We know, how scary it is. I was on SSDI for quite a long time myself, and it is scary to give up those benefits, and particularly if you're on SSI and you're afraid of losing Medicaid services, if you're not in a state that has Medicaid expansion. That's a very scary prospect. So a lot of people will start off as a volunteer, and then maybe they'll take a limited number of paid hours, and then some people gradually build up. And at some point, many, many people decide to make that final leap and move from disability benefit back into paid positions, and that's why we have to have the ability to pay people enough money that they can live on, and certainly not as little as SSI pays people. That's way below minimum wage. So a number of the peer-run organizations around the country have started to adopt a new business model that lets them employ peers through the peer-run organization, and then they contract the services out to providers. So like managed care companies often will contract with a peer-run organization to do all the peer support that's necessary under their managed care contract. And people have also peer-run organizations that are contracting with hospitals and community mental health centers, mobile crisis teams. There's so many different ways that peers can work, and it's really great when we see these peer-run organizations develop and build up and become successful. The company in Phoenix, Arizona, RI International, Recovery Innovations International, like I said, they've trained more people than anyone else in the country, and they employ more peers than anyone else in the country except the VA. The VA employs the largest number of peers. RI employs over 600 peer specialists. And like I said, they've trained close to 10,000 people. When they started, and for many, many years, they were a peer-run organization. Now, I don't know what their board of directors is like nowadays, and I don't know about their upper management, but they are an extremely large organization. I believe they work in, I think it's 6 states, and they also work in New Zealand, and they're making inroads into Scotland and some other areas. They do training, they employ people, they contract out services through managed care. That started with peers. And so it's really wonderful when we hear those kind of messages. Next slide, please. So, as these organizations grow and they kind of begin to really focus in on providing the best peer services possible, and maybe they begin to expand into the private sector, then they have to grow an infrastructure to support that. And that's where a lot of peer-run organizations and nonprofits in general have problems. For instance, if you're going to provide services that are Medicaid reimbursable, it's very difficult for a small organization to bill Medicaid. Medicaid has one of the most cumbersome, complicated billing systems in the country. And so what some people end up doing, some organizations wisely end up doing, is they work through a medical billing organization just to do the billing part. They provide the services, then the billing organization bills Medicaid for reimbursement. Or, like I said, they contract out the services to another organization that bills Medicaid. So you have to build up your organization. You've got to have people that are capable of doing billing, people doing human resources, people kind of overseeing quality control, good supervisory roles, very effective, marketing in order to get your services out there. But what this does do as these groups begin to expand their infrastructure, it opens up new possibilities for peers to work too, like in department management or new program development or project managers, supervisors, different levels of peer support and in training roles. I mean, there's all kinds of positions that become possible as this thing grows so much. And there are probably 24 really large peer-run, no, there's probably more than that, because California has probably more than that all by themselves. But large organizations that bill out or contract out peer services to be paid for by the state, to be paid for by community mental health centers, all of the different kinds of ways of doing it. There's a group in LA called Project Return. It's a peer-run organization that I think has about 50 or 60 peer specialist time contracted out around the country. Next slide, please. So along with these expanded roles, organizations that provide peer support are beginning to create career paths. And there's a really good reason why we have to create career paths. Like I said, a number of organizations are adopting a model of work that allows them to do this. But next slide, please. So, next slide. Okay, I don't know how that happened. So, as they develop their career skills, like I said, you can move into all kinds of roles. And one of the reasons that peers can do this is because, many of us have had a previous life with employment, and we bring to peer support all kinds of other skills. Some of us have owned our own businesses. Some people have worked in management or marketing or computer sciences or just about any kind of role that's possible, peers have done. And then, for whatever their own personal reasons are, they end up in this system and then hopefully begin to build a new career in this system. Next slide, please. So again, as we look at the most successful organizations, we do see that they have a diversity of skills. So in order for an organization to be strong, it needs those skills. So we actually can go out and begin to recruit peers into these roles. And that's really interesting. Not everybody who works in a peer-run organization needs to do peer support. Not everybody is going to be good at peer support, but they might be good at management. They might be good at billing. They might be good at all the other things that a peer-run organization would need to run effectively. Next slide, please. So there's all kinds of ways for people to expand their education too. I mean, you can take courses online. Local communities offer, different kinds of skill training. Certification almost always has some kind of ongoing education requirement in order for you to keep it. Local community colleges and other institutions frequently have classes in things like business management. And then professional organizations often provide peer webinars. And we have a professional organization for peer support. It's INAPS, the International Association for Peer Support. And they are growing again. They started off very strong in the mid to late 2000s, and then they had a management change, but they are coming on strong now and really becoming a professional organization. And I think eventually they will be almost like our own guild or union for peer support. And that
could you repeat what that means again? I'm sorry.
Yes, it's
Could you repeat?
International Association for Peer Support.
Thank you.
And they just had their conference is in December this year. So they have a conference coming up in December, and I believe it's in Orlando, Florida. Very interesting conferences for peer support workers to go to. Tremendous amount of new ideas and information. It's always exciting to see what other groups have come up with that are doing the same kind of work we're all doing.
Your office is so cold, and it's early. It is so cold.
I don't know if that was addressed to me or to somebody else. Anyway, next slide, please. There was a survey done called Talent 2020, and it was done of thousands of employees around the country in all kinds of different roles to find out what were the major things that would cause people to look for new employment over the next year, the coming year. And lack of career progress topped the list. It wasn't pay. Most people would think that lack of adequate pay would be the number one factor that would make you look for a new job. But actually, people want job satisfaction, and they want to be able to advance and feel like they're growing in their work. And so that's at least as important as pay. And according to this survey, and it was a very large professional survey, it was really career advancement was the number one and pay was number two. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, I'm sorry for the intrusion. This is Rachel from Michigan. This whole thing is probably very premature for me. I just recently even learned what a peer support specialist was. But I have a question about the certification in Michigan. It looks like you have to have had access to public mental health services in order to become a certified peer support specialist. I've always gone through private insurance. So is there any route for me to become a peer support specialist?
I am really appalled to hear that. I've heard some peer organizations say that before. I didn't know any state had actually adopted that because, people come from wherever their services were. And many of us, when we first started having symptoms, we had jobs and we had health insurance. And so for a while, we started off at least, even if we didn't end up there, but we started off in the private sector, and some people stayed in the private sector. For instance, if you had a job and qualified for SSDI, then you had Medicare to pay for your services, which allowed you to stay in the private sector. So I think that's really discriminatory, and I think that's a really poor decision that whoever created that certification made. To answer your question, the national certification is possible, but you would have to, unfortunately in Wisconsin, it sounds like you would have to do 3,000 hours of volunteer work because they won't allow you to get certified. I'm just appalled by that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I just recently stumbled upon it. I was recently unemployed because of a severe bout of depression, and in looking for a new job, I was actually searching for sales support specialist, and peer support specialist popped up. So, this transformation I've been going through, my passion has really been wanting to help people who are in the business environment reach out for assistance before it's too late.
Yeah, and that's an excellent thing to do. I know a few other people who are kind of zeroing in on that too.
May I interject?
Sure.
This is Toby from Tennessee. My suggestion would be possibly looking into vocational rehabilitation and telling them about your dilemma. And seeing if they could find something that will link you to the closest training and maybe pay for it if you qualify to go on your career path.
That's a very good idea. In fact, the job board posting that I saw was for Easter Seals, which does a lot of vocational training and stuff like that. So perhaps I will approach them and ask where I can go. I do apologize for tolerating my needing to go and needing to ask this question right away, but I have to jump off. So if you could give me a name of someone that I could contact in Michigan, or can I just go to the website?
The Department of Vocational Rehabilitation.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, and have a great day, everyone. I got to jump off.
Okay.
Thank you. So, talking about career advancement is an extremely important aspect of having a job that that you like and that you feel like you can grow in. Some of these experts on employment experts, and I've been involved in a number of employment programs, and last year and the year before I was working with the Department of Labor on a project to increase competitive paid employment for people with disabilities. And so I was representing people from the mental health field, and there were experts from all different types of disability areas. And the one thing that we know is that you have to use people. That's a terrible way to say that, but you have to use people's skills or you're going to lose them. When you go through your peer support training and, have some opportunity to begin to develop your skills and then your job limits your ability to grow, you're not going to be happy. And so, some employees are beginning to actually look at this specifically. I mean, I think, the tech industry is probably at the forefront of really trying to be user-friendly to their employees, though I know some of the bigger tech companies have become, very cutthroat because everybody wants to work for them. But the tech industry really started off a movement of trying to have employee satisfaction, and we can learn a lot from those smaller kind of companies. And we know that our work is satisfying when we're allowed to do it, and then hopefully we're allowed to grow in doing it. Next slide, please.
Patrick, can I ask a question? This is Lori again.
Yeah.
You had mentioned some trainings being aimed towards the supervisors of peers. Do you know if anybody's specifically doing training for peers who would like to get into supervision? To become supervisors, specifically for peers?
Larry Fricks does the training, Appalachian Consulting. They did the original trainings for the Florida certification. Larry Fricks, by the way, for those of you who have not heard of him, he is the father of, I like to call him the grandfather, but he doesn't like that. But he's the father of certification. He started the first certification program in 2001 in Georgia. And I mentioned that earlier on, that in their first group, they certified 35 people. Georgia has one of the most advanced systems of peer support in the entire country. It's really fabulous. But he does the training. I don't know that there's an organization in Florida. I think now somebody is doing an online training. I'll have to find out, Lori. Can you email me?
All right, we'll do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Because I know I've heard of an online training for supervision for peers. So, you need to ask yourself these questions as you start to think about this isn't just a job, it's a career. So what would a career in peer support look like? I mean, what would you want it to look like? What do you want out of that kind of role in your life? What does career advancement look like? Because right now you can look at the job you have and maybe there's some chance for advancement or maybe there's no chance for advancement. but what should it look like? What would you want it to be? And how would the skills that you get in peer support actually help you in building your career? Not just because you're good at those skills, but how you can actually use those skills. Things like, you know, we learn to be very good listeners. We learn good communication skills. We learn to, you know, work through problems towards goals and figure out ways to, you know, help create healthy habits for people in the world. So we have a lot of skills that can actually help us to build our own career. And then look very seriously at, you know, some of you are probably being paid fairly well, and I would imagine some of you are not being paid what you feel like you should be paid. Most people feel that way. But what would it take financially for you to feel like you were being paid for the value you bring? And then think about how you see your career developing in the future. And when I do trainings like in WAM or I do trainings for peer support, I ask people to look at their life and create a one-year vision for what their life will be like in 1 year, and then to create a plan how they're going to get there. And then I also ask people to create a 5-year vision, what they want their life to be like in 5 years, and then create a less detailed but a 5-year action plan about how they're going to achieve it. And I actually do this myself, and I redo it frequently. You know, if I have a bad day at work, I get mad, and then I decide my goals are different. But actually, no, I've used it throughout my work history, even prior to being involved in this. Next slide, please. So finally, how do we grow healthy organizations, peer-run organizations and other organizations that will actually support us in building career services, careers and peer support? So think about how the organization you work for could do a better job of supporting the work you do. You know, sometimes it's sensitive to bring up the idea of change in an organization, but that's how change happens in an organization, is people figure out better ways to do the activities of the organization. And so if you can be a thought leader in your organization, if you can be somebody who comes to management with solutions, not just problems, but solutions, you become a more valuable employee. So begin to just imagine for yourself, and maybe even jot down notes about how an organization could best grow to be healthy and promote careers for all of us. Next slide, please. Hi, whoever that is. So the last.
Hello?
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 Are we? That was weird.
Well, yeah. Anyway, somebody was muted, I guess. But anyway, you know, so those of you who've been working for a number of years, you know, may very likely have the number of hours necessary and the additional knowledge that you need to take our test. And when you go on the website, there's a document in there, and as you go through, you'll find it, that shows you the 56 or 55 core competencies that we have. And that means skill sets, basic principles, and then all of the things that come under them. So in other words, it's the kind of knowledge that you need to be sure you have before you take the test. But if you've been working at this for a number of years, you've probably learned enough to do that, to take that test. But you can check, you can look at it before you get involved in applying and all that stuff. So I really want to thank you. Next slide, please. We've got some ways you can contact us. So my email is at the bottom, and our emails at Mental Health America, the national office, are very simple. They're our first initial and our last name. So for me, it's P. Hendry, H-E-N-D-R-Y, at mentalhealthamerica.net. Kelly Davis, who's changing slides for us, is K. Davis at mentalhealthamerica.net. We have our main office in Alexandria, Virginia. I worked out of that office for, I think it was 6 years, and then I decided I have a son who's been experiencing some issues and in crisis for a while, so I decided I needed to move back to Florida. And our management, our CEO, was kind enough to make the opportunity available to me to